All right, welcome everybody to this week's edition of Freedom Hub Working Group. I'm your host, Jeff Cantor, along with my co-host, Charles Froman, and we're here sponsored by your Freedom Hub, where we're bringing all the activists and disruptors around the world together. We've got some exciting people in store for you today. And before we kind of get into that for a quick second, let me just shift gears for 1 minute here. We do operate a LinkedIn page we'd like you to participate in for sure, so please request attendance. You'll see links later, but we definitely post all of these great videos every week, and they get up on the weekends. And again, as I said, we're being sponsored by your Freedom Hub. So please follow up on that front. Now, as I said, these are the links that we utilize. So let me open this. Let me open this for a quick second. And these are all case sensitive. So
right. So you saw the 3 video pages whereby Monday you can watch and download Dr. Hieb Merritt's talk from today at YouTube, BitChute, and Bright Eon. And then for today, we are very pleased to have an old friend of ours, Dr. Hieb Merritt. She is an orthopedic surgeon and also runs an anti-aging clinic in the Nebraska-Iowa region, where she's well known in Omaha. She is a former president of the Association of American Physicians and Surgeons, which since the 40s has been the free market alternative to the AMA. And she also is a former gubernatorial candidate for political office. So she's got the medical chops as well as the political knowledge to match those 2 areas for today's talk.
My talk is Corona, a viral tsunami. And I'm not an infectious disease expert, but I was a military surgeon for a number of years. And then I served on the NRAC, which was a kind of a think tank. And I was the doctor that had to be on there by congressional law. And I've met some interesting people. And after 2001, I got very interested in biowarfare because I saw that as something coming down the pike. And in that, I gave some talks on smallpox and things, but I met an interesting guy who used to be an infectious disease researcher at USAMR. That's our Army bioweapons laboratory and biodefense laboratory. And so when these things kind of come around, like when SARS came around, I called him up and I said, so what do you think about this one? Nah, don't worry about it. When MERS came around, I said, you worried about this one? Nah, don't worry about it. Well, this time he was out in the jungle, but through the intermediary, I got to him. I said, you worried about this one? He said, yes. And that's when so I've been paying attention to this since January. And as you know, I've been sending you guys this, but I've been sending out emails to my friends, family, colleagues, because it was very clear to me that we're not being told the story. We're not being told what obviously the very high paid smart epidemiologists know in the CDC. And so I decided I'm going to at least tell them what I think is going on so they can be prepared, because I don't think this is, you can't trust the government in this one, to tell you the truth. And so my talk today, I'm going to talk about why there's so much confusion about what's happening, why this is worse than influenza. That's my worst. I hate that. If I hear one more person say to me, oh, the influenza was the worst, it killed 80,000 people last year. That is such a talking point that's nonsense. So we're going to talk about that. And then where did this come from? What's happening around the world? I think we should look at what the other countries are doing and what we should learn and not do what some of them done. And then what do we need to do? And I apologize to the doctors here. Some of this I put together because I thought there are going to be people on here who might want to hear what we need to do personally for ourselves. And I am somewhat comforted by Cameron Crowe's statement generally in life when he said, in Vanilla Sky, he said, every passing minute is another chance to turn it all around. That's generally true, but I have to say in this situation, every minute we dither, every minute we ignore the problem, it doesn't just get bigger, it magnifies exponentially. And that's what we got to remember here, that this is an exponential disease. Here's one of our big problems. Now, I got this from Matt Bracken, who's a former Navy SEAL officer and interesting guy, but he lives on a sailboat. So I can't take credit for this analogy, but it's a perfect analogy. So let's say you lived all your life on the ocean and all you ever saw every day were these waves. They'd be 2 to 4 feet at the max. And that's, you're 60 like me, 67 years old. That's all you've ever seen. And so we have this kind of idea that tomorrow will be the same as yesterday. And so when some kid comes running up the shore and says, there's a 100-foot wave coming, run. What do you think? You think, oh, that's a conspiracy theory. No, I've never seen one of those in my life. That can't be real, until it washes over your head. And unfortunately, this is a viral tsunami that we're facing. Now, another good part of this metaphor is this tsunami did not start 5 minutes before this photo was taken. This tsunami started days ago, out in the middle of the ocean, due to something that happened in the middle of the ocean that very few people were aware of. But it was building, and it was growing, and it was coming at you. And it wasn't until it came right up close to the shore that you could see it, that you appreciated what was going on. And that's what's happening here, and it's called normalcy bias. And I think, you know, when I try to figure out why the CDC is being so slow off the mark here, part of it is normalcy bias. There are other things. We could have a whole hour on why the CDC failed to do their prime directive here, but that's another story. But really, I think a lot of people are just hampered by this, our county health departments, because none of us that are alive today, for the most part, lived through the pandemic of 1918. And most of us have never lived through a war. Most of us have never lived through anything other than hearing about a war distantly. We've never been in a big mess. So this is a new thing. Now, those of you who did participate or were around for the Iraq War, as I was, one of the lighter moments of the Iraq War was Bagdad Bob. If you remember that, that wasn't his real name. He was the Iraqi information minister. And he was famous for this picture where he was standing up there with his hands, and it was actually taken from a video. His hands are up, and he's saying, there will never be any Americans in Baghdad, never. And as he was saying this, of course, there were tanks, American tanks rolling behind him. And it was such sad disinformation. You knew he was forced to go out there and say these things. And I look at poor Tony Fauci and I think, is this is he being forced like Bagdad Bob to say things that he knows are not true? When he gets out there and says influenza is worse, or that we've got this, we're under control, don't worry about this, your chance of being damaged by the coronavirus is very low. You know, he must know what's coming because he can run the numbers as well as I can, or better. Oops, back up here a little bit. Now, yeah, it's not the flu. Let's start with that. So unfortunately, part of my screen's getting cut off with your, can I lower this thing? Yeah, I can. Okay, so it's not the flu. Let's look at the flu. First of all, they say that influenza worldwide on average is about 0.02% mortality. Now, sometimes they can go up. And so at the max, though, it's 0.05% mortality. Although death rate is not completely fixed here, and we're not completely sure. It seems to be settling in around 3 to 4%. And that does not make, as Tony Fauci said, that's not 10 times worse, that's 68 times worse. I can do the basic math there. This is orders of magnitude worse than seasonal influenza. Now, oops, I did something that caused me not to be able, there we go. I guess I'll do it that way. And the other thing, the other reason why is this different? Let's look at the pandemic of 1918. Now, the pandemic of 1918 was worse than any flu we've had recently. And it affected everybody. It wiped out whole Inuit villages. It killed about 675,000 people nationwide in the US, and a lot more worldwide. Everybody that lived through that remembers it at a very bad time. My neighbor had his grandfather was alive, and he was a farmer out near my area where my farm is. And he remembered his grandfather telling him how one day, now they told you in 1918 how to avoid dying from this was don't go to church, because most people were rural and they were staying home on the farms. If they just didn't interact Sundays at the congregation, they could avoid getting the disease. And that's what his grandfather did, which is why he's here. But the neighbor did not take that advice. So one day he hears the neighbor's cows all coming to his fence, and he's thinking, what's going on? He goes over there, crawls over the fence, goes over to the neighbor's house, looks in the window, and the whole family, husband, wife, children, are all dead on the floor. So this was a bad disease, but keep in mind the numbers, 675,000. Now, this is the government's own numbers. The government claims that we're at risk of maybe 2,600,000 dead. And they're basing this on the fact that they think 40 to 70% of people can get infected. Now, 40 to 70% they're expecting to get infected. I ran those numbers. Even at 3% mortality, that's a lot more than 2.6 million. It's 3.9 million, or up to 7 million dead. So they know something really as bad is coming, and I don't think they have they're softening the blow, I think. Now, they talk about the R naught number. That's a number that everybody's throwing around, but it's not the whole story. But when you look at infectivity of different diseases, seasonal influenza is very low. If you're less than 1, it just goes away. So sometimes it peaks up and starts propagating. It means on average, influenza people, the number refers to how many people you infect. So influenza affects 1 or 2 people. The pandemic of 1918 was more. You infected 2 to 3 people. Smallpox is a bad disease. This is the one I've been worried about. Smallpox killed more people in the 20th century than all the wars put together. And it's the combination of the most infectious and most deadly disease we know. The smallpox that's sitting in our bioweapons labs, or the CDC and vector in the Soviet Union, or the former Soviet Union, Russia, it's 60% fatal. So it's probably the worst actor out there. Fortunately, it hasn't gotten out. Measles was highly infective, but really it wasn't very deadly. Regardless of all the vaccine discussions, even before we had vaccines, it really was not very deadly. Ebola is more deadly. Anyway, you can go down there and see. Now, MERS is interesting because we're going to talk about it in a little bit. The MERS is the Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome. It was 38% deadly, 38% mortality with the disease, but it was very tough to get. You know, it wasn't that easy to get. SARS, on the other hand, was 15% mortality and easier to get. So it's somewhere intermediate. And Corona, now they're saying the average person may infect 6 to 7 people. Again, that's yet to be completely determined. Now, here's let me back up. I think I missed one there. No, I think that's okay. Here's my favorite Bagdad Bobisms. Let's back up and say, this is not a droplet disease. Okay, they keep talking about this as if it's flu. One of the hospitals, which I'm not associated with now, but the place I was doing trauma call, it sent, I still get their little emails. And this email said that we should wear this type of a mask that you're seeing on the nurse on the left side of your screen. So I emailed them and I said, do you realize this is an airborne disease? It spreads like smoke, right? It's just gonna fly around your little mask. And I didn't really get an answer back, but the point is that that's just nonsense. That's thinking about droplet diseases. Now, to know what an airborne disease does, let me tell you about the last disease of smallpox in Europe. This is how badly an airborne disease can spread. Here was a guy from Pakistan, and he shows up in the cold German winter in an out-of-the-way small German hospital. You can picture one of these old lumbering wood and brick hospitals. And nobody quite knew what he had. He had a high temperature, but the rash hadn't broken out yet, so people didn't recognize it as smallpox, and they hadn't seen smallpox for a decade. So he comes and they know he's sick with something bad. They put him in this really long, narrow isolation ward. He's way at the end of the ward. Well, so, you know, probably 10 yards away, 15, 20 yards away, somebody opens up this door looking for his sister. The doctor yells, close the door. This is an isolation ward. He closes the door. He dies of smallpox. The other thing that happened is, against medical advice, the patient cracked his window open. He was just breathing normally. Wasn't coughing, just breathing normally. His breath, and they did this by smoke studies, so we know this is a fact, went out the wall, or out the window, down his wall, down to the cold ground of the German winter, up the wall of another wing a few floors up, and killed about 6 student nurses. That's a bad airborne pathogen. And this is airborne like that. Now, fortunately, it doesn't kill 60% of the people it touches. But how useless is it to cough with that kind of a disease, to tell us to cough into our elbow or to put on this kind of a mask? My personal favorite Bagdad Bobism is the fist bump, as if somehow, even if contact stuff is important, which it may not be that important, but it's always somewhat important, somehow the germs on the back of your hand are not going to be the same as on the front. I just think that's just kind of nonsense. As Winston Churchill would say, nonsense with which I will not put. Okay, that's not all this is to say about infectivity. Okay, infectivity depends on what you do. So although 6.6 people may be the average you're going to infect, it's not for everybody. If you're this guy on the left, the monk in his cloister on a mountain, and you go to visit him and you have the disease, you might give him the disease, but that's all. And he might, if he has it and you don't have it, he might give you the disease. That's one person. But if you're the guy in the black shirt at the party who's immortal because he's a millennial and he doesn't believe any of this is happening, and he says, I'm going to go out and have a great time tonight, and he's infected, look what he can potentially do. And all the people in that room, if he's not infected, probably at some point in the evolution of this disease, there's somebody in that room that would be infected. And then again, the whole thing goes south and he's infected now. That's the problem. This is the argument about isolation and quarantine. It's not just to quarantine the sick, it's to keep you away from people wandering around that are sick. and to keep the sick and to keep the person wandering around through big crowds. Now, we're going to look at some graphs, and I don't mean to bore you too much, but this is really important. If you look at flu, and by the way, the CDC no longer really reports flu. They report influenza-like illness, flu-like illnesses. Try to get the actual data on actual influenza any season. It is extremely tough. Try to get a graph of the actual deaths of influenza. Well, what they do is they sample it, they make prognostications, and they come up with these huge numbers. But in the small print, they always tell you between any given season, only 4 to 7% of influenza-like illness is actually influenza. So keep that in mind. Helps to run out and get an influenza vaccine only for 4 to 7% probably. But here's what a graph looks like of a seasonal disease. And here you see the graph goes up, but then it comes back down. So every time, I'm sure there's somebody biting their knuckles every flu season at the CDC, but I don't. I mean, I know it's going to go up, and I know it's going to come back down. That's seasonal disease. But let's contrast that to this. This is Spain right now, okay? Now, the first death that they recorded in Spain was on 3 March, and I was kind of watching for this. Spain just went down rapidly. That means that wasn't the first person that had the disease, obviously, for 3 March. It's been percolating off the left hand. This is the first deaths recorded, but it's been percolating way off here on the left-hand side for quite a while. And then once it starts doubling, people are still not noticing much until it starts getting up to here. Now, I missed today's number, I guess, on this one, but because these are my graphs. But let's look at yesterday. So yesterday, they had 530 people dead total. That was their total death total. If you look at where half of that was, it's down about 2.5 days ago. So they're doubling their numbers of dead every 2.5 days. That's what happens in exponential disease growth. Now, the other big lie is it only kills old and sick. It's not just killing old and sick. Unfortunately, when Trump talks about the thin white line, and one of the reasons that I'm keeping track of this so much, my son's a 30-year-old general surgery resident. Last year of his general surgery, it's going to sweep over them. There are a lot of dead doctors. They're young and healthy guys with no medical problems out there. And a lot of other people that, like, in their 40s, I am going to talk to you about some risk factors that we can ameliorate, but there are people dying that are not the classic influenza death. The classic influenza death are people that are old and sick, and they're immunologically not able to fight off a bacteria because they die of secondary bacterial pneumonia mostly. And that's what the lung looks like of a CT scan on that side of the graph, the single CT of somebody with pneumonia. But on this disease, and I got this, there's a Belgian doctor that reads the radiologist saying, I can't stand to see these lungs of these young people that are intubated. These are horrible. These are the worst things I've ever seen because they're actually erosive lung changes. The lung is being chewed up by this disease. Now, the other thing that's different about this is, it's my opinion, this is a man-made bioweapon. We can argue about that, but I got to say there's a lot of evidence. And this started with back in, can't remember when they published this. It was January, I think. But they basically, this Indian group from India, they discovered what they said were clear signs of genetic cutting of this pathogen. Once they got the genome and they looked at it, they said, we see these unique inserts. This is a sign of genetic engineering. This is the man-made pathogen. In favor of them being right is the fact they were forced to withdraw the article. First, they withdrew the article, or first they argued and they said, wait a minute, here's the data. Look at your data yourself. We know it's not peer reviewed because people are putting these out just to get people thinking and going. But look at the data, and then they were forced to withdraw it. And the Zero Hedge, that's not even a medical journal, that reported this, they were deplatformed for just reporting this. So when I see things like that, I think there's some truth that somebody doesn't want you to know. The other thing is there's no viral ancestry. Initially they said it was the snakes, and when that was shown to be, snakes were hibernating, that didn't work. So then they said, oh no, it's the bats. Well, there is a lot of bats have coronavirus, so there's a lot of sequences in this pathogen that, yes, are in bats, but they can't trace it to any real known. The whole thing is not traceable to any known wild thing in our genetic banking. And they also found this pea shuttle. They did try this thing on the right. The reason that's there, because the last term was, well, it's not bats either. It's the pangolin. And I had to look up and see what a pangolin was. That's a pangolin. I'm raising the BS flag on that. I don't think the pangolin started all this. But anyway, some other people and other researchers found this pea shuttle SN sequence that is apparently somewhat known it's a tool of gene splicing the Chinese are known for. But the big thing that convinced me is that if there was a PhD guy out in the East, and he basically showed that the reason this can't be a natural evolution. These things, it is true that these viruses mutate a lot, but this one has large sequences of unrelated viruses. It's not small mutations, it's like big chunks. This is like Frankenstein and you put a little girl's leg on the left and an old man's arm on the right. We know that didn't happen by just evolution. Oops, sorry. And so the other thing is, it's got the chunks that it's got are pieces of all those viruses, MERS, SARS, HIV, that do certain things that put together make a really bad actor. You know, by themselves, MERS is not that infectious because it's very deadly, but it doesn't get into you easily. And when we come to one of the things we can do to ameliorate or make people not get so sick with this, maybe we're going to talk about that. Why SARS has been, this thing has been manufactured to make it like SARS, but 20 more times able to hook into your lung. And in fact, actually, this is it. Okay, so this is a French researcher, and he's talking about some of the gain of function manipulation that's been done. And I thought Jeremy from APS helped me with this little gift, but this is actually, it's pretty cool what they can do these days. They're showing you the protein part of this virus that hooks into your ACE2 receptor in your lung. And that's what we're finding, is that what has been magnified in this virus is it has 20 times the affinity for the ACE2 receptor that the SARS did, 10 to 20 times. This is actually a picture. This is you see all these weird spiky looking things, but this is the picture of the real electron microscopy of the virus nestled in among the outside finger-like things are cells. But I thought this was pretty cool. And so we know where it's attaching, and maybe we can do something about that. Okay, oops, I'm just not hitting it well. There we go. And so here's the thing. One of the things they found, and I said this is not the old and the immune compromised primarily, but it does seem to have a 3 disease characteristic. In other words, people with diabetes, people with heart disease, and people with hypertension, and which is hitting younger people now. Those seem to be affected. So why would that kill somebody who's 40 years old with hypertension? Well, one of the things that all 3 diseases tend to be put on are these ACE inhibitor drugs. And what an ACE inhibitor, and I'm not an internist and I'm not a cardiologist, so forgive me if I don't have this quite right, but here's what I understand. That when you take which wasn't a problem, by the way, till now, when you take one of these ACE inhibitor drugs, it blocks the ACE1 pathway, and it causes your body to upregulate the ACE2 pathway significantly. So in the heart, it upregulates the ACE2 pathway 5-fold. And so now you've got a pathogen that has got special affinity for the ACE2 pathway, and you're giving people drugs that make you more of those pathways. So one of the things that they're suggesting now is to, and I checked, losartan's not I thought it was an ACE inhibitor. It's not, forgive me, so that's when but people that are on lisinopril, half the world's on lisinopril. It's probably a good idea to switch them off to something else. Now, the other thing is Horowitz and Dembek are 2 guys from the Eastern Bloc. They probably know what they're talking about. And they said, we've looked at this. Here's what you should think about if you're trying to figure out if something's a bioweapon. Here's the signature. It's a disease caused by an uncommon agent that's rare. Got that. There's lack of an epidemiologic explanation. In other words, no clear idea of source. And recently we just had a paper published where the Chinese themselves said they could not trace it back to the seafood market. It did not come from the seafood market. That was the original explanation, but there's no viral antecedents there. And that it has unusual manifestation and or geographic distribution. Race specificity would be one. I thought initially this might be race specific to the Arabs and Chinese. It doesn't seem to be. It looks like the Italians are just proving that. So here's our situation so far. Okay, we've got almost 200,000 cases identified. Again, the number of cases you can't lay your hat on because it has to do with testing. What we do know, though, these are the cases that we know have identified, and of those, 7,954 are dead, which is a 4% death rate. Now, the question I have is there are only 41% that have fully recovered. Where are the other 59%? I think a bunch of them have just come into the system. So we've got thousands and thousands of people laying around in hospitals still being treated. It's not going away quickly. And there are some reports of people having secondary infections. There are reports of people that just, and maybe that's just a relapse, but it almost looks like some people don't get immunity from this. I don't think that's a big problem, but it seems like a bimodal distribution. And again, the ACE inhibitors may be part of this. They're either 83% of the world just walks away from this. They get some sniffles, they get a cold, they get a little cough, and they're done. And then there's another group that get very, very ill. And of the people that get admitted to the hospital, at least 5% go to the ICU, and they have a very bad outcome. I'm on the thing. Okay, this is a pandemic program. This is what we learned, Pandemic 101. This is an actual picture of the Corvid virus, by the way. So the first thing is, it stops, we got to stop the disease entry. You got to stop it from your point of entry. Stop it before it gets into your country. That would be the perfect thing. If you did that, then you don't have to shut down the whole country. But once it gets into your country, then you have to stop person-to-person contact, and you have to stop and give supported care. The biggest point here is if you don't do this, your hospitals are going to be overrun, and we're going to look and see what happened in Italy. Now, this is what happened in China, and I give China a lot of credit, actually. I mean, I don't know where they are in this whole development of this stuff, but I don't think it doesn't sound to me like they loosed it on themselves accidentally, although I'm not ruling out anybody at this point. But let's assume they didn't. It hit them with no warning. It was a totally unknown pathogen. And the bad thing about this is it's a long incubation period, which means they had thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of cases out there just percolating, waiting to be the tsunami to roll over them before they knew what was going on, because there were no tests, because they needed to develop the test from deciding what this pathogen was. And Dr. Lee is the example of what I'm just afraid is going to hit here. I mean, he was the hero of Wuhan that died in 3 days after he, was after it really hit Wuhan. He really got sick and died in the ICU. Now, they take care of you take care of your own. I mean, he was given good treatment, but he was on a ventilator and everything, and a young, healthy appearing doctor died. So there are a bunch of doctors dying. So it's not an easy thing. But they really went to, I mean, now only a totalitarian nation can do this, but you probably saw the pictures. I mean, they welded people into their apartments. They shut down cities. They have literally 350 million people. They have under quarantine. That's more than we have in our nation. They have 350 million people under hard down quarantine, and they've stopped all flights. They've stopped everything, and they're not out of it yet. People say prepare for 2 weeks. 2 months ago, when the government was kind of hinting you might need to have 2 weeks of food in your house, I told my friends, I said, listen, the Chinese are not coming out of this easily. It's not going to be 2 weeks. This is going to be lucky if it's 3 months. And we're 3 months into this for the Chinese, and they're still in lockdown. Now their numbers are going down. I'm not taking any numbers from the Chinese and running with them, because I don't think you can trust what they're telling us number-wise. They don't test the same, and they do different things. And because they're not above hiding things, but we know it was bad, and I do think they have it under some control at this point, but they're not over. They're still getting new cases. People are dying. Here's the score by nation so far. And if we're gonna give an award, the gold medal goes to Russia, because the first thing they did when this thing started in China, they said, oh, we see what's going on. And they closed their borders. They just closed them down. And they didn't listen to the CDC. They didn't listen to the WHO. They told the Chinese ambassador that, we're sorry, we're not being racist. This is about a disease, and just go away and sit down. And they did the right thing. And they actually, they profiled people coming from China and the Chinese, and they made sure that they didn't have disease wandering around in their country. Now, they're not out of it yet, but they're the only major country of note in the whole world that doesn't have deaths. Italy is having they're the biggest problem right now. Their hospitals are in collapse. I'm going to talk about that in a minute, but they're doubling every 4 days. Spain's doubling every 2.5 days. Now, South Korea, they get the gold medal for doing everything right. They're really awesome. And I'm going to show you some pictures from Korea. In spite of them being the first ones to break out with a big amount of patients, they only have 84 deaths. They're really doing great. Now, here we are. And I have to say, this number's been changing enough that I've had to update it just even this morning and getting it on a little later. Now, let me just say, if people say to me, I'm on a couple radio talk shows periodically, and I'm on one in WHO, and that's kind of the biggest microphone in Iowa. And the talk show host texts me about stuff every once in a while. He says, now, why are you saying this? I got doctors saying just the opposite. And I said, look, here's the deal. Science, if it's right, should be predictive. I said, I was hoping that we were going to get quarantined here because we need to shut this down. We need to stop moving. But if we're not going to, and the Trump administration is giving it 2 weeks to think about it, to observe, here's what's going to happen those 2 weeks. And if I'm wrong, then you can discount what I'm telling you. But I predict that at a week we'll be over 250 deaths, and at 2 weeks we'll be over 1,100 deaths. If I'm wrong, then I'm wrong. But that's my prediction. You guys can write that down because it should be predictive. And based on my graphing, that's what I predict. Now here's Italy. So every day I come and when I come home from work, I sit and I get all the data and I graph it out. And here was their very first death back here. Nobody really appreciated what was going on, and boom, it's taken off like crazy. It's gone exponential. And the problem in Italy now is so bad, up in the Lombardy region, they don't have enough bed spaces to keep the infected away from the uninfected. You can see what the nurses are wearing, and when I show you Korea, you'll see the difference, but they don't have the kind of masks you need. They don't have real goggles. They're not really getting the personal protective stuff that they should. One of the big things that happened, and by the way, they don't have enough respirators. In fact, let me go back. They have so few respirators right now that if you're over 70, you just stay at home and die. We can't put you on. If you need to be ventilated, you're going to die, because that's what they've done. They've done a cutoff on age, kind of what we predicted years ago would happen. But the thing that they figured out, and they've been warning the EU, they've been, there's I can't remember his name, it starts with an N, like Nicardo or something anyway, and he wrote a big letter to his colleagues in the EU, and the UK had published this and said, look what's coming, we have to get ready. The first thing that he said is, well, they didn't close their borders on time. They didn't stop the influx, and they figured out that all of these cases up in Lombardy came from one person. And she did go through screening, but because she didn't come directly from China, she didn't get picked up. And that's still what we're doing. I can tell you a horrible case in my own county like that. I've got a patient, it's not my patient, I do something, but the patient's in my county, and she's sick as a dog. She's coughing up blood. She's been sick for 10 days. She's short of breath. Her mother-in-law died of a pneumonic disease. Just, we don't know what it was. That they just didn't do an autopsy, but she died. And so now, and the patient, the person herself just got back from a trip to Honolulu. Honolulu is an area where the airport's thought to be infected. So here's a person that got on an airplane with a temperature, coughing up blood, sick as a dog, and got through our screening. And now through friends, I told her, call the health department. She did. The health department told her to take this quiz, and she took the quiz, and she didn't deserve testing. This is insane. This is how you infect thousands and thousands of people. And and you can't go to the UNMC, you can't go to the university hospital ER without making an appointment. So it's just, you can't, or your doctor has to send you, and her doctor won't send her. His doctor's giving her cough medicine. So I don't know what to say about that, but that's the kind of problem that we're going to have. We've got to be more on the top of it, but they kind of started that way too. And the problem is they only reacted to hot spots. They didn't realize the disease was like an ocean of sharks. They only saw the couple in front of them. So they quarantined Lombardy. They did things up in Lombardy. While they were doing that, then it broke out all over the place. And now they've got more cities in quarantine. But they had no situational understanding because they didn't have testing. Oh, I don't know what their testing is doing now. But another big problem that they failed to appreciate, and I, a month ago, went to my hospital CEO, and I said, you need to protect the EMT people. That's what they didn't do. They didn't protect their EMT people because they didn't see any disease in their area. But by the time they saw a disease in their area, all their EMT people were infected. And because that's what they did, they picked up sick people and they went around the city. They transmitted this disease all over the city. And their ambulances were contaminated. So now they recommend that in a big city, now this is not for our place because we only have one ambulance, but if you're in a big city with lots of ambulances, you have one dedicated ambulance for Corona or COVID, or now it's SARS-CoV-2. I can't keep changing names on this. I call it Corona. They have one ambulance dedicated to that, and one crew that primarily is the crew per shift anyway. Now and this is what I'm saying that I keep having to tell, and I apologize to the doctors that get this, but I have to tell this to the people that just say their argument is, well, we don't think this is a big deal. Come on, I'm going to go to the bar because it's just not a big deal. We don't see anybody with the disease. Okay, so let's say this is Lake Baikal, And Baikal is known for swallowing ships. But let's say you're a stealth U.S. Navy SEAL team, and you're going to drop in some kind of deep hull vehicle, and you're going to twirl around in the lake, and you want to know, you want your sonar guy to say, how's the water? Is there anything down there we need to worry about? And he says, nope, nothing to worry about. We don't see anything. Well, because this is his sonar guy. And that's the equivalent of our health department telling us we have no evidence of community transmission. Well, when Nancy Messonnier was saying we had no evidence of community transmission, in the whole of America, we'd done less than 1,000 tests. You don't know that you have community transmission because you're not testing. So it's one thing to not have situational awareness, but it's another thing not to know that you don't have situational awareness. Now, here's Korea, and I give Korea all the kudos. First of all, President Moon said from the get-go, the country's entered a war against an infectious disease. We need to all pull together. This is about the country. Okay, it's about all of us. And they have a little different social structure, so it works pretty well for them. But they emptied out their, this is in Seoul. Seoul's used to having all these, what it says apparently, I don't read Korean, but it says that you can't gather in groups, you can't protest, you can't do anything, just go home and stay home. So they banned public gatherings. They told people to stay home. Now they didn't do martial law, but they said, wear a mask on all public transportation. And I do think they cut down on public transportation between cities, but they basically say it's common courtesy for them to wear a mask in public if they're sick. So masks work better on the victim than they do on the rest of us, but they're okay with wearing a mask. It isn't a bad stigma. Unfortunately, in our country, we think, it's kind of a bad thing to wear a mask, but their quarantine victims were quarantined down hard, and they're close contacts. They weren't letting them get other people infected. And in fact, this is only the Korean, I love this. This is the Korean way of doing things, but they had a beautiful, now first let me say, the day before this, they had protests by the locals about having a quarantine section in their area. Like we had in Ashland, Nebraska, we didn't have protests. I mean, we actually accepted it, but there was some muttering. But these guys, now they're going to lock these people down with what they call thorough control. It kind of sounds like total victory, but like that computer game. But they had a little ceremony there in their traditional dress to welcome to quarantine. Now you're going into your steel-lined room. And they've shut down their factories. Schools are closed. And again, they didn't have to do it by draconian law. They just said, you got to do this or we're all going to be sick and dying. And there's cooperation there. Now, they also were awesome about this. And let me just point out, we still are not testing very much. We still can't get testing kits. This thing broke out in China on December 15th, roughly. I mean, to the point where that was when Dr. Lee texted out the secret, hey, we're in trouble here. By January 2nd, the Koreans had identified, they'd gotten the genome from China. They had made a test kit. They had set up and they had plans for these mobile units and these drive-through units. They had good suits. They had teams identified. They had it all. I mean, they had figured out in January 2nd, they'd done this. And so they've been right on the ball. They got a whole bunch of people from the first couple plane loads from Wuhan, then they shut that down. When you go through these, you get your temperature, your vital signs taken. Notice the difference in the quality of their, you don't see anybody in Korea dealing with anybody that could be infectious that isn't in a suit like this. There's none of that cheap nursing stuff we saw in Italy. And part of their effective quarantine is when you get those drive-through testing, you get a text on your phone 3 days later to tell you whether it's positive or negative. And all day long, you can be notified of people in your area of possible contacts. So you can say, I was at that market or I wasn't at that market. And they call it social grace that comes with wearing a mask in public. So everybody's got masks on. I just think they've done an awesome job, but it shows in the graph here. They're not going up exponentially now. Since the 3rd of March, they went up, but then now they're on a nice linear path. And there's some evidence it might be starting to drop off. We don't know that yet. They're still going up, but they are not at the rate that anybody else is. I'm really impressed with them. Italy, I got to show you by contrast. They keep going up. And in fact, this is somebody from the International Healthcare. They said about Korea, the way they're dealing with the virus is really organized. It's transparent and it's efficient. There's no, people are not worried they're not being told the truth. It's transparent. Okay, now this is us. Okay, I've been graphing us every day since I got the numbers, since we started having enough deaths to make a difference. Okay, and if you look at the two lines, here's the bars are the actual number of deaths. Today it was 115. Here's the red line is what Korea would be doing. If we were on that kind of a line, we'd be Korea there. But we're not. We're on the exponential line, like Italy. There we go. And unless we do something dramatic, it's going to roll over us. And even if we stopped all motion right now, keep in mind that whole land, all those submerged mines, those are infected people wandering around our society. We have thousands and probably hundreds of thousands of infected people in America right now that are going to continue to die and bring this graph up until we know. You will only know when you get it under control, when you fall off the exponential graph. I don't know why, I just keep showing Italy, I guess, because I like that. Okay, so here's what we need to do as a nation, as a people. We have to stop, at least with this kind of infection rate, you have to stop over 85% of interaction. You can't be out always doing what you were doing. You need to work from home, stay at home, do what you can. This is not isolation. Isolation is not shopping alone. You know, it's not going by yourself to a bar. This is isolation. The joke about the toilet paper, I get it. You know, if you're going to be stuck for 2 months, don't want to run out of toilet paper. But you got to actually take this seriously, and you're going to isolate with your family. You need to be alert to symptoms, because this does not apparently present like influenza. It presents with chest pain, a deep cough, and shortness of breath. And then what you're supposed to do, like I told you, my good friend that's came back from Hawaii has been sick as a dog and cannot get help. Call for help and hope it comes. I mean, you know, I don't know what to say for that. It's supposed to be where you call and you get an appointment. I told my friend, I said, don't tell her to ask for a test. Tell them she's short of breath. How can they not, if UNMC takes somebody that's short of breath, or our hospital, somebody's got to get to her. But that's, you know, I don't know. School has shut down here, thank God. We finally did it this week. We should have done it before. But sending your kids to school at the beginning of a pandemic is like sending them in the ocean when there's a tsunami warning. It's your belief system that decides. But here's the point. Kids are going to survive this. Most kids don't die of this disease. They've got great immune systems, right? That's the key to surviving this. But their parents and their grandparents might not. So, as in the pandemic of 1918, it's the opposite. The pandemic of 1918, it was the old people that survived because they'd been immunized, because they had a flu. They'd had the flu 3 years earlier, 10 years earlier, but the kids had not. There'd never been a big flu epidemic in America for 15 years prior to the pandemic of 1918. I think it was 15 years. At least it was 10. So that was the young army people that died. The young people that died. Well, now it's the opposite, and we're going to have people losing their parents over this. And so children might not die, but they're going to bring disease home to people more vulnerable. So this is my advice. I mean, prepare for a prolonged situation. I don't think this is going to go away in 2 months. I don't think we're going to be out of it. I don't know what the ultimate outcome is going to be if we don't get immunity. I think we're getting immunity, but that's one of the unknowns. We don't know yet. The other issue is, keep in mind, all of our prescription drugs are coming from China, or they were. 90% of the regular prescription drugs and 99 to 100% basically of our antibiotics came not only from China, but through Wuhan. Even if they weren't made there, that was the big transport hub. And China has shut down the export of the drugs we need to fight this. They may negotiate with Trump over this, I don't know. But right now, they don't have stuff to spare, and it's tough. And now, so I think what you need every day, and start thinking, getting a lot of it, I think. I don't think it's hoarding to be prepared. It's, you know, I grew up in Iowa when we weren't preppers, we were just Iowans. Everybody kept 3 months of food in their house or more, because they lived through people that had lived through bad times, like the Depression or failures of crops. And it's a good time, if you eat junk food, it's a good time to get your nutrition beefed up and be healthy, because this is ultimately, you need the best immune system you can get. I'm going to shamelessly plug my book that I wrote a few years ago. And this was about, I expected the collapse due to socialism. I didn't really expect it due to this, but when you can't get to a doctor, you don't want to need one. And the best thing, the whole center of the book is how to not need a doctor. And the other issue, I tell my friends that are on prescription like cardiac meds, I said, the Army did a study and they showed that you can keep meds around for 30 years and they don't expire, except for bee sting stuff and old tetracycline, which nobody takes anymore. So generally, if it's not kept at extreme temperatures, medicines last a lot longer. Those date of expiration are for legal reasons, not real chemical reasons. Get your medicines ahead of time because they're going to run out. There's probably, there's probably a 3-month lag that we're going to have in the ability to turn up and make medications. I don't know what it's going to be, but it's not going to be pretty. So if you're on a cardiac drug, you'll have to go to the doctor, have him authorized getting more ahead of time, and just pay cash for it if your insurance won't cover it. It's too often these people go to the pharmacy and they say, well, I want 3 months worth. No, you can't have it. You're not due to have it until 14 April. But they don't tell them why. What the issue is, your insurance company won't pay for it for 14 April, but you have the right to buy it. We still are that free, thank God. These are the ACE inhibitors that, and then maybe some of the doctors know some that I don't have on there. I called the pharmacy, actually, my hospital. I said, well, give me the top 3. And then I found some others, but I'm not a person that prescribes these, so I'm not that familiar with them. But every one of my patients is on lisinopril. I mean, I saw 2 90-year-olds in my orthopedic clinic yesterday on lisinopril, 90 years old. I thought, here is the perfect victim for this virus. I told them, I like seeing you, but you should stay home. If you need something, you call us. You should isolate yourself. You're at high risk from this stuff. So this is some things to consider. And I think it's a sad commentary on today's medicine that the Attorney General is now going after people that are selling what they consider snake oil for coronavirus. No, the people that they were going after, I know one of them that was targeted for nanosilver, and he was targeted until he pulled out the DOD research on nanosilver and Ebola and nanosilver and one other virus. It actually has been shown by the DOD to be the one thing that seems to work against those things. We're not saying it works against this, but it's one thing we know. And silver has been now used in standard medicine for years. We line our catheters, our urethral catheters with it. We do all sorts of things. We have silverdine for wounds, and so it's not voodoo. Vitamin D is a big antiviral. The Japanese showed that kids getting a flu shot were less effective at preventing the flu than having your vitamin D levels appropriate. And nobody above the equator can get good vitamin D levels. I don't even test. For bone health, and nobody's ever overdosed on 10,000 units a day. Don't construe this as official medical advice, but I think 10,000 units a day is safe on everybody, and unless you're on renal dialysis, you should start it immediately because everybody's low. My former husband, who is a very fanatic golfer, we were down in Yuma, Arizona. It was the sunniest city in America. It is the sunniest city in America. He played 18 holes of golf 6 days a week. He was in great shape. He didn't always wear sunscreen, but he got a lot of sun, so he should have been good. I said, he wouldn't take vitamin D. I said, if I test your level, will you agree everybody's low? He said, okay. His level was 20, which is the very bottom of the scale. And that scale should be really probably 50 to 110 rather than 20 to 80, but I'd love to have a level of 100. Anyway, long story. That vitamin C, I have pulled up all Linus Pauling's work, and it's really pretty impressive. Now, something that bothers me a lot about this, one of the things that they're using and treating very sick patients in the hospital with corona over in China and in South Korea. No, not the North Koreans. The North Koreans, their policy is to shoot the victim. That's what they're executing. Anybody comes down with it. It's a very effective method to keep your numbers down, but we don't want to do that. But vitamin C actually is making a difference. And we've known this since the 1930s. IV vitamin C has been known since the 1930s. The problem is you can't take it orally in big doses or you just poop it out. So they're pulsing it at 28,000 international units IV every morning. And they're having success with it. Now, guess where they're getting the vitamin C? They are the biggest producers, but we ship them some. They're the biggest producers, but we ship some of ours. And our FDA made IV vitamin C illegal in 2017. What the heck? Okay, I mean, you just can't, I'm scratching my head about this. Now, for those of us who don't want to get plugged into an IV, but want to get our best vitamin C levels, the idea that it just makes expensive urine is nonsense, and they know it. What you have to, you can't take it all at once though, and you need to take certain types of vitamin C. Here's what I do. When I really, and this had nothing to do with the virus, I can prove this from getting, not being able to go down sick in the OR. If I felt myself getting sick with things, what I found out is liposomal vitamin C, real liposomal vitamin C actually crosses membranes, maybe even better than IV. And you can take huge doses. I've taken 10 grams, 12 grams all at once of liposomal and went from being just sick as a dog in the morning to going to the gym in the afternoon. And I've had many patients that told me the same thing once I told them the trick. But you can't just stop at taking that in the morning. The thing you have to do, that's liposomal. So that does distribute, and it's the first salvo of the war against the virus. Really what I do, and this is, I'm not saying this is the only answer. This is just my answer. I'm just giving you what I do. I take a couple grams of liposomal vitamin C in the morning since this broke out. I usually take 1,000 milligrams a day, every day of liposomal vitamin C. But now I'm taking 2,000 of liposomal, but it's more expensive. So during the day, I just get the GNC chewable vitamin C, keep it by my computer at my desk. Every once in a while, every hour or two, I eat a 500 milligram tablet. You need to take it all the way through the day. You need to keep supplying the vitamin C. So it's like if I want to drive to Tulsa to see my son, I can't put 30 gallons in a 10-gallon tank to get there. I have to refill all the way down, and that's the same principle here. Zinc has been around as an antiviral for a long time because it's and they put it in those things that I can't remember the name of it. It's an over-the-counter thing like Airborne or something, but they've shown that zinc helps. And it turns out, here's an interesting point. Zinc also potentiates the ACE1 site in your cells, in your lung cells. So it does make sense that may be, and everybody's low in zinc. I tested my kids on this very expensive test I did years ago. I tested a lot of people, and they actually grow your cells in culture and look at your nutrient status. And I found that everybody's low in zinc. It's got to be our soils or something. So normally I take 30. It doesn't hate, the plastic surgeons give much more than that. They give 220 milligrams of zinc for 10 days after surgery to decrease scarring. Can't hurt to bump your levels up. Licorice root, actually, it was described in a paper on 2003 on developing a SARS virus, and they make this comment: the only thing we know right now that works is licorice root. Unfortunately, I hate licorice. Now, I did hear an idea from an orthomolecular cardiologist. This guy's a pretty sharp guy, and he has been using IV vitamin C for years, and his comment is, we don't know what the best thing to do here is, but hydrogen peroxide kills viruses pretty darn well. He says, put a little 3% hydrogen peroxide in an inhaler. And I have to say, being at 67 at risk, when I go to the hospital, I come home, I just take some of that and I inhale it in. I think it's not a bad, I had an inhaler from years ago, $45 on Amazon kind of inhaler. And might help, can't hurt, don't know. But that was a smart idea I thought he'd come up with. Masks don't really protect you. There's a lot of comments saying, well, if the government doesn't want masks, why are they buying them all up if they don't think they work? Well, they work for the victim having them on more than they work for you walking around. In other words, if you're a victim and you're coughing and sneezing stuff, it catches it somehow. It's less apt. It makes, the Chinese have said that. They don't work for you being protected against the victim, but if the victim has one on, they don't spread it as much. That's all I know on masks. But it's probably not worth investing in trying to get some big N95 masks. I do think that it does make some sense to keep some of these around. I put one of these things in my car. I put some gloves in my car. I don't think transfer, we call it fomites, I don't think fomite transfer, meaning from surfaces, is the big issue. But it might be some. It works. It's never a bad idea to wash your hands. And I put on gloves. I probably look like an idiot, but I put on gloves when I go to a gas pump, because if you think about it, they're the place where multiple hands have touched. And I wipe down when I get out of the hospital. I go to my car. I take one of these Cloroxes and I put it all over my steering wheel and my stick shift. I mean, it just makes me feel better maybe, but I think that makes some scientific sense. I'm not sure about all this. I mean, I don't think anybody's shown that this makes a lot of difference. Certainly in your house, I got to say, every study I'm familiar with says these things are kind of toxic, and soap and water is probably the safest thing. I use some of this. I use some Windex and stuff, but I wouldn't don't go crazy spraying Clorox all over the house. Clorox is actually what became Agent Orange. I'm just going to say, when Clorox breaks down to dioxin, it's probably not the safest thing to have around small children and things. I don't use it a lot, but I just use old-fashioned Windex. But But what they have shown is that families that are so assiduous about spraying everything with Lysol and doing that thing, their kids tend to have more allergies and somewhat more autoimmunity, I think. But at any rate, it doesn't make you healthier. It's like the false narrative that a plastic cutting board is better. It turns out wood has natural anti-bacterial things in it, whatever. So there's a lot of stuff that's voodoo, but I don't think I would go crazy spraying your house down, making everybody sick with toxic stuff. The hard, smooth surfaces touched by multiple people, I guess, are the ones that I'm more concerned about. Now, this is my final thing to say, and then whatever questions. But so I've had this discussion with a bunch of people, and they show me these Facebook pages, and I said, listen, here's the way it works. They're saying, well, I don't believe it. I don't see this happening around me, okay? So this is my this morning I got mad and I drew this schematic of this. I'm not a very good artist, but yellow is a person that's infected but not symptomatic. The red are the sick people, and the green are the well people. This is your town. You can multiply this by tens or hundreds or 10,000s. I don't care. Here's somebody that should have been stopped at the border right here, but didn't get stopped at the border. So he goes into the town, okay? So far, all these people are fat, dumb, and happy. They don't realize it's coming. Now, that infected person has infected a couple more people during the first couple weeks. But here's this guy over here that's writing on Facebook. What is all this fuss about? I don't know anyone with a coronavirus. Do you? Somebody sent me one of these Facebook pages. That's an exact quote. Okay, so here he is, and he thinks he's just fine. Okay, now we're day 10 or 14 or a little longer. Could be. We know that this thing is infected. Some people will go 27 days before exhibiting illness. So this is unfortunately probably designed to be a very long prodrome, very long incubation period in some people, which allows a lot of asymptomatic scatter, which is great for a bioweapon, by the way. Whether it is or not, it's great for one, but it makes this really hard to contain. And then this guy's saying, this is all political hype. I still don't see any sick or dying people, really. But things are happening under the surface that he doesn't appreciate, okay? Well, now people are getting sick, and they're going off to their house, or they're going to the hospital. And he's saying, where is everyone? I'm going to the bar, because he's a millennial. He thinks he's immortal, okay? And then now everyone's dying around him. He's sick. He's calling for help. And when he calls the hotline, they say, we're sorry. If you can still breathe, or even if you can't and you're over 70, please stay home, as we cannot help you. That's where we're going with all this. So what the bottom line here, my point to everybody in this whole, I know people are upset about the idea of quarantine. They're upset. They think it's a political, just to get Trump, or to take Trump out, or not to take Trump out, or whatever. It's about saving your hospitals so they can save you. That's really the point here. We have to not be a tsunami on our hospitals. And I'm afraid we may be past that point, but it never, and somebody said to me, well, are we past the point of no return? I said, as long as the patient is pumping blood out, you can still put your finger on the wound. I recommend we do that. We need to stop it right now. I sent a letter, my little email thing I send every day to President Trump in the White House. And I say, please, quarantine, shut down the country, stop people moving. We have to get this under control. I'm a doctor. My son's a doctor. I don't want to be part of the dead white line. And I don't want him to. I just don't want all these young, healthy guys going down with this. Let's do something to help our medical people so we can take care of people. That's really my talk. I know I've missed things, but I'm open for questions and comments by people that might know more about this. Go ahead.
Well, Lee, that was needless to say, that was quite good. And so we're certainly going to have a number of questions, and hands are flying up already. And what's nice is you really didn't kind of mince words, and you definitely gave some definitive things to do. So let's kind of see what reactions we've got out there. David, I see you've got your hand up.
Hi, Lee. What kind of zinc do you recommend, and where do you recommend getting it? On your recommendation, I'm using Life Extension to get it online.
Oh, that's work. I mean, the nice thing is you don't go in a pharmacy. I think the zinc is probably pretty good no matter what you do. I didn't mention selenium, by the way. It also turns out that Chinese soils are deficient in selenium. And so I have seen some combination things. Life Extension always puts out a good product. If they can still get it to you, I mean, you could probably get zinc almost anywhere. The liposomal vitamin C is a little harder, but I was able to, just the other day, I got some more. I like Mercola's liposomal vitamin C. I don't get paid from them. I'm not a paid spokesman, but I really like them because I think, you know, when I was doing locum tenens somewhere and I was just coming down with this thing terrible, I was just so sick and I had a whole week to go and I thought this is a nightmare. And I, you know, just regular vitamin C wasn't doing it. I got on Amazon, and God love Amazon. They drop shipped it to the hospital. I got it the next morning. I was dying. I took 12 grams and by noon I was fine. You know, I was in clinic. So yeah, but zinc, I think pretty much anywhere. But yeah, I like Life Extension is also a good company that I don't get paid for.
Very good. Charles, I saw your hand up too.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. And for everyone else, if you look in your control panel, you'll see a hand raise symbol if you want to ask a question. I was going to actually ask Ralph Usatola, the vitamin lawyer, about his Natural Solutions Foundation supply of nano silver. I know they've been pushing that for a long time. Tell us about nano silver, Ralph.
Am I on? If I'm on, I'd be happy to do so.
Yes.
First of all, the presentation was awesome. I'm very, very, very complete. I agree that that vitamin C and D3 and sunlight, all those things are really useful. Nano silver, and you were talking about it earlier about the attack by a number of sources on nano silver right now. If you want access to the same nano silver that was part of the DRTA, the Defense agency that paid for the big study that was declassified in 2009. That was silver that was made by ABL, and it showed very clearly. And back in 2014, Dr. Lebo and I went back and forth at the FDA and FTC on this issue, and we finally came to the conclusion that the government would not close us down if all we said was that nano silver supports normal cell membrane integrity, and if a virus cannot attach and penetrate and replicate, the logic goes from there, and that's what it does. There are other things that do that too. It turns out that humic acid forms little coatings around viruses and prevents them from attaching too. But nano silver, particularly, 99.999% and better. And Dr. Rima's nano silver is available at truthaboutcoronavirus.com and also directly at her site, which is nsfmarketplace.com. Very good stuff. The Institute for Health Research, of which I'm president, just published a paper on silver safety, going over the issue of Argeria and talking about the 2009 declassified study. If you go to inhere.org, I-N-H-E-R-E, inhere.org, and go to the journal, to the 2020 section of the journal, there's an article with lots of great citations.
Excellent.
So, yes, I think
I'm interested in that article.
And I would, and please let me know when this archive is up, so I can add it to truthaboutcoronavirus.com. I want to make sure people can get at this discussion.
Certainly.
Can I say something also about what he just said?
Please.
You know, the thing of it is, the FDA has a long history of wanting to kick down manufacturers' doors and keep them from producing things that on the one hand they say, oh, it's just snake oil, it doesn't do anything, in which case why are they even allowed to get involved? But one of the ones that comes to mind is CoQ10. You know, the Life Extension people and somebody else, they were the manufacturing CoQ10, and literally they kicked in their doors and tried to arrest them. And then what do we find out a few years later? That it actually was published in the Journal of Cardiology that it decreased morbidity of cardiac disease. Okay, I hate to say it, but there's some point there. Now, the FDA is, you know, what's the guy, the mayor of New York right now?
De Blasio.
De Blasio made this big stink the other day. This is why we need government health care, because we still can't get testing kits. No, Mr. de Blasio, Mayor de Blasio, you can't get testing kits because the FDA kept the states from it was illegal. In 2010, they took over their oversight of all testing. They call them it's NVID, it's like, or non-implantable medical device. and they took over the authority to regulate them. And that's why you couldn't get a testing kit. That's pathetic, but that's what they're doing with this nanosilver and these other things. I mean, I don't know. I guess it's nanosilver they're primarily going after, but don't we have something else to do, you know, Attorney General Barr, than going after things that we actually use in standard medicine? I think that's just disgusting. By the way, what do you think about inhaled nanosilver or a nasal spray? Because
there's been people using it. I certainly have a little spray bottle that I have nanosilver in, and I don't go out without spritzing my eyes and ears and face. And first time in 5 days that I went out, I did wear a face mask because I'm 75, and first of all I spritzed that face mask heavily with silver on both sides, let it dry. Dr. Labo says it's not going to make much difference, but if it makes you feel better, that improves your immune system.
Yeah, no, I just think so. I took home for the hospital and I spritzed some in the nanosilver in my nose. I don't know if it's going to help either, but every little bit helps.
Every little bit, right.
Real quick before we take the next question here, these do get posted every Sunday, just
Awesome.
so you know. So by then they're always up by that point. Somebody, and I'm not sure who the person is, but they're listed as Vantage Point, had their hand up.
All right.
Are you there? You have to unmute yourself if you'd like to ask a question.
Yes. Hi, Jeff. This is Hisham Al-Maligi. Dr. Lee, two-part question. One is, can you list in the order of importance the supplements that someone should have as precaution? And the other part, since this pathogen or virus spreads via air, does that mean that basically everyone will get it at a certain point?
That's a good, let me start with that last one. That's a good question because I think that's one of the ones we don't know. We have to wait and see. I think people are getting immune. You know, if this is like the pandemic of 1918 and it never comes, you know, it was a totally unique pathogen. It was a totally unique, even though we keep worrying about it coming back, it's never come back. We've never had that problem with a bad influenza killing us like that did. That's been over 100 years. So there's a possibility this is a one-time deal, but I got to say, here's the problem with this. What I learned from going through all this thing, it is airborne, and we may all, let's say everybody that survives this is immune. Let's make that as probable true. Here's what I think is going to happen is that we're not out of this is like when we entered the atomic age and we sat around worrying about the next atomic bomb. Unfortunately, we're probably never going back to where the world is without these bioweapons pathogens. And, you know, you can't get rid of your bioweapons labs. That would be like unilateral nuclear disarmament. On the other hand, I have a problem with this one of the other problems I have with this whole narrative about the accidental release is it was too easy. Early on, they said, oh, we know those Chinese, they're not very careful about how they dispose of their gloves. They just throw them outside. You know, these are very competent, high-level virologists in a level 4 lab. That might fly to somebody that doesn't have a clue about these things, but I'm going to tell you that's something they're not going to do. So I don't buy that at all. It was just too pat. So I'm kind of thinking, the problem is, what I'm going to say is, there's a potential that this is the first this is the first salvo of whatever's coming next. We don't know. Unfortunately, we are in a new age now, and we are in the age of bioweapons or bad pathogens. Even if it were accidentally released, I found out some of the stuff that's being done. You know, Bill Gates's lab actually created in 2015 a novel coronavirus, and in 2019, just before this broke out, he was staging a war game in New York City called Event 201, and they chose as their potential pathogen a novel coronavirus. You know, if your wife died suddenly and you had been buying insurance on her and talking about ways to kill her, you know, I got to say, honestly, you'd be looked at seriously. You know, there's some issues there that I worry a little about. But my point is, what I learned about that is that they're doing experiments on these, that they're creating theoretically for chicken viruses, which, why would you have to war game that? But they're doing it, and they're saying, you know, they're doing all this gene splicing and they're doing this gain of function gene splicing. These are incredibly dangerous pathogens that this world's never seen before, and it's all over the world, and we can't put that genie back in the box. So I think this is a practice run. But back to your list, Personally, I think vitamin D is one of the most unbelievable vitamins everybody should have. You know, I got into this because I'm an orthopedic surgeon and I see adult rickets. I see women that should have healed their fractures that they didn't because they're not mineralizing and their vitamin D levels in the tank. I've had people tell me after taking vitamin D for a couple of weeks, they feel better. And I thought that was kind of crazy, but now I think it's actually true that vitamin D, they're so low. Vitamin D works at the levels of the telomeres. I mean, it really is a very, it's like an anti-aging hormone. It's not really a vitamin. So I would put D number one myself. Because I take it no matter what. I always take 10 to 15,000 a day because at 10,000 a day, I only got my level up above 50. And 50 is the minimum. I guess my level was 55. 50 is the minimum at which you decrease your risk of breast cancer by 85%. That's one of the studies that came out, and there's more than one. I mean, it decreases colon cancer, it decreases cardiac arrhythmia, dementia. I can just go down the list. There's a ton of things that D do, and there's no side effect bad at 10,000 units a day. You know, after that, you might want to test your levels, but I think that the longest lived people in the world, the Okinawan tribesmen, they get 30 to 40,000 units from the sunlight. They know that. So that's probably what we should have in nature. I think the next, I mean, I don't know how to prioritize the rest of them, but I think C next, because I think C is what you know, the first thing, I remember this in 1976 when I was in medical school, freshman in biochemistry. And I just remember this because I thought it was so crazy. The first thing that happens when your body encounters a virus is that your white cells suck up all the vitamin C out of your serum. I mean, any vitamin C floating around, your white cells take it to go to war. So this is like putting the arrows in the quiver of your army, you know, your old time army. You got to load it up with ammunition to go out and fight the battle. Well, it takes at least 1,000 milligrams a day to start saturating, you know, in peacetime, your antiviral army, right? But the RDA is 76 milligrams a day. Now that's just insane. That's the US RDA. That tells you how government is working for us. And I thought that was crazy in 1976, and it hasn't changed. In fact, in the anti-aging community, that RDA stands for recommended death allowance, which might be true in this case. So I think C is good, but I think I used to do this even without the virus. I used to, when I was in one steady job, instead of going from hospital to hospital, I used to have a jar by my X-ray viewing thing, and I just every once in a while I'd eat one of those 500 milligram things, and I think that would be I think it's a good life. I've seen a lot of very old people in my clinic in their 90s that were very healthy looking that did take vitamin C during the day, a couple times a day. And there's probably something to that. So I like C. And then after that, I think, but the four I would really make sure you're taking is D, C, zinc, and selenium.
Very good. Well, I have to say, unfortunately, we've reached a point where we're way past our time frame, and and the way you concluded there really kind of leaves us hanging for the next episode. And you can certainly review some of these recommendations as well. So, Dr. Merritt, I really appreciate being here today.
Well, thanks so much for asking me. Thank you.